Hey guys, welcome back. Woodworking here. Today I have another Learn from the Pros episode. This comes from this weekend of Vainglory Action Summer Season, Week 1. TSM versus Gankstars, the first game of their series. And after the draft, let's see what the analysts have to say about how they think this game's going to go.
Go folder.
That's going to be a rough matchup.
Suijay not sounding
played
persuaded.
against Samuel, against Hammers, and destroyed him with Lance and Baptiste.
This is reminding me a lot of last season when we first saw Taka start to come out as the counter to Samuel, and everyone just continued to run Samuel without banning away the Taka. And now they're just running Samuel into Baptiste, even though we've seen Baptiste counter the Samuel extremely hard a few times already.
So what is it about Baptiste that makes Samuel basically unplayable? Is it just the fact that he can't really move as much as he needs to?
Yeah, because
That's
the
exactly
Ordained locks him in that circle, and Samuel needs to go with his Drifting Dark. On top of that, you have Lance that can root him in place and then displace him with Githyan Wall to again lock him down, stun him, or push him out of his Drifting Dark. It's just a really strong combination into Samuel. And Lyra can't peel. Lyra isn't there to peel, just to put a Borokov, and that's it.
Yeah, with the Samuel and the Baptiste, that's 4 different options that TSM will have to stop Samuel from being able to stay in his Drifting Dark. You're not going to have 4 reflex blocks available to you at all times.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult to avoid them. Very, very quickly, I want your predictions going into this one. We've got to get onto the map.
TSM hands down.
TSM.
All right, we've got a TSM desk here before we go in.
So, late spoiler alert, Gankstars ends up winning this game, and this video is going to be all about why. First, let's talk about the points the analysts made. One of the things that Suijay brought up was that TSM just played against Hammers and destroyed them with Baptiste into Samuel. And here's the draft from that game he's referencing. Now, the difference here is that Hammers had Vox as their carry and not Kestrel. And one of the things Kestrel does for Gankstars is prevent Baptiste from being close enough to even ordain Samuel most of the time. Because if Baptiste is in ordain range, he's also in glimmer shot range. And so it prevents a lot of the positioning required to make that part of their comp successful. And, you know, I don't blame the analysts for not catching that. It's hard to have the foresight to see that. But it's a big point, and it's a big part of why Gankstars ends up winning this game. What does end up happening is the win condition for TSM is landing an impale on either Samuel or Kestrel. And the win condition for Gankstars is not allowing that to happen or blocking it. And I'm going to give you an example of almost every fight of this game where if the TSM win condition happens, they win the fight. And if the Gankstars win condition happens, they win the fight. So here we go. So this is the very first team fight of the game, and you're going to see Flash miss an impale here, and TSM should just back out of this. There's no reason to fight this hard under the enemy's turret this early in the game. And Vonsi and Best Chuck both walk into Kestrel missed that they saw her put down, and yet they shouldn't even have been still engaging in that fight at all. Samuel was there by that time, and there was no, they weren't going to get in it. Like, there's no success out of that for TSM. This next fight leaves Gankstars in a pretty bad position after they just took TSM's turret and had a huge advantage. And on Gankstars' part, I don't super blame them for staying that far forward because they still had Fountain and TSM doesn't. But let's watch what happens when an impale lands on, in this case, all 3 members of Gankstars. Something also to note that's going to happen here is Flash X uses his combat roll to set up a proper angle on his impales. And most good Lance players do that, but if you're a professional and you notice a player telegraphing abilities like that, you can use it to your advantage. Now, in this clip, Flash X lands an Impale on Araki to start the fight, and although the damage doesn't immediately follow, it forces Araki to use his boots and keeps Gankstars out of position long enough that TSM is just able to put down enough damage, and then the fight moves into the jungle, which is really a spot where Gankstars doesn't want fights to happen. That's where Lance is best. So in this clip, Flash uses his Impale on the Crystal Miner, and so he doesn't have it for this fight. Really good use of War Treads by Vanes, knowing that TSM was out of position, and it ends up being a great fight for Gankstars. I wish they would have been a little bit more aggressive towards the end of it, because if you look, Araki and Samuel both have their reflex block still, and Vanes has every activatable up except for War Treads, which he used to start the fight. So I think they could have gotten a little bit more out of that. They do end up taking Kraken, so it's not like they got nothing, but I think they could have gotten another kill out of it. This next fight is interesting, and even the casters said during it that it was an amazing fight, and it was probably one of the fights of the week. But what happens here is Gankstars moves out of the jungle, kind of concedes their Tribush to TSM because of what I mentioned earlier. They don't want to fight in the jungle versus Lance. But I think when they got to their Mustache Bush, they should have kind of set a trap with Kestrel or something up there and fought around that choke point, with them being up in lane and making TSM come up through the choke point. Instead, they kind of try to do this kiting thing, and you'll see what happens. One Impale changes the entire fight. So I'm going to pause it right after the Impale because I want to talk about it for a moment. If Araki blocks this Impale, Flash probably dies, and then the fight goes probably a completely different way. But instead, they're able to blow up Araki, and Flash even lives through the fight, all because that Impale landed. And this is probably the best example that I was talking about of if an Impale lands on one of the carries of Gankstars, TSM wins that fight. Here's another just example of it. Flash gets taken pretty low, but he lands an Impale on Araki, and once again, this is getting redundant, but you see what happens when he does that. Alright, here's the final fight of the game. It's a very long, drawn-out fight, the game-winning fight, if you will, and Flash misses his first Impale, and although I think Gankstars should have done more work there, you could see them kind of kite this out, and then they know exactly when Flash is going to Impale them because they're in a choke point. And like I mentioned in one of those first clips, he does a combat roll to set up the proper angle on his Impale, and then he uses Impale. And I don't know if they were, predicting that based on, his previous movements, but when somebody shows a pattern like that, it's very easy to exploit. Even if you don't tap your reflex block early, if it kind of puts you on guard saying, okay, you just use this combat roll and he's in Impale range, it's probably coming. Not much else to say about this. I just wanted to show you some super high level examples of playing to your win conditions and giving you video evidence that, if one team plays to their win conditions, they can win, and vice versa. And you saw in each of those fights, if one thing happened, one team would win, and if it didn't happen, then the other team won. So, as always, guys, I really do hope you learned something, and I'll see you on the Fold.